Okay, everyone, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So if you want to take a seat, panelists, or if you want to get some food or drink just before we get started. I know there'll probably be some people trickling in from Blockchain Week. How many of you are going to another event after this? Okay. All right, so we'll try to get you guys on your way. So thank you all for coming. And before we go into the panel today, which I'm really excited about, I want to introduce Buck here from K&L Gates and let him just say a few words about K&L Gates. They are our sponsor. We were very lucky to have them. We've been actually hosting our events here for almost a year, and it's been just a lot of fun, and we hope to continue to work with them. So.
Great, guys. Thank you so much for coming. I can yell loud. We're K&L Gates. We're a law firm. We have about 1,800 attorneys and about 45 offices or so, and do pretty much everything. I got to know Karen a little bit, maybe, 18 months ago. I'm a renewable energy and environmental lawyer. We have some blockchain clients that are sort of developing platforms to either track the carbon attributes of certain types of fuel and electricity, as well as trade energy back and forth among each other. That's where Karen and I cross paths. So that's sort of my niche and where I fit into this ecosystem. But thank you so much for coming and for the interest. And we're really happy to host Karen and Blockchain by Women, and hope to see you all again here soon. And I'll kick it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So again, thank you guys for joining tonight. What we really want to do is focus in on these protocols that these women here represent or are going to talk a lot about, and the use cases that they're best known for, their strengths and their weaknesses, and leave a lot of time for Q&A for you guys to delve in more deeply. So the first thing I want to do is just have the panel go and give an introduction to who you are, how you got started in blockchain, and also the blockchains and protocols we're going to be talking about today. Go ahead and start.
Can you guys hear me okay? I'm Liz Roebuck. I oversee product management at Dash Core Group, which is a software development organization that works on Dash, which is a payments-focused cryptocurrency with instant transactions and very low fees. How did I get started there? My background was in management consulting, and then I did e-commerce product management at Disney, and just started to get really interested in cryptocurrency and fell down the rabbit hole, as I'm sure many of you have. Started going to conferences and ended up meeting the Dash Core Group team there, and they happened to be hiring for a product person, so here I am.
Hey everyone, my name is Jin Joo. I've worked at a few layer ones. I was head of growth at Stellar, then I joined Thunder and Solana, and was a director at Tezos. Now I'm working on this education initiative called Dystopia Labs. So how I got into the space was actually by accident. I was backpacking and I came back and was helping out at 5-minute startups, and a recruiter reached out for Stellar, and that's how I entered the space. It was very fortunate.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Mansi. I'm the head of product strategy at Sia. Sia is basically a decentralized cloud storage platform. So think about Amazon, AWS, S3, or Google Cloud platforms. But now think about having control over your own data rather than relying on these centralized points of failure. How I got started in the space, there was this whole demonetization that happened in India. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with it, but overnight the government decided certain currencies are not valid, and that was just a shock to the whole economy. That's when there was a lot of interest that, from India in cryptocurrencies, and that's how I got started in this space. But my background's in finance. I've worked at multiple financial institutions before jumping into crypto.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Sills. I'm a software engineer for AgoraK. So my background is computer science. So what AgoraK does is we do a couple of different things. First, we have a product called Secure ECMAScript, which allows you to download JavaScript dependencies and install them safely, which is really, really useful in the blockchain ecosystem because, like, you know, if you're downloading something that takes over your computer, it can steal all your money, right? So Metamask, others are using this. The other thing that we work on, and the part that really excites me, is a smart contract platform. So kind of how I got into this was I heard about Bitcoin. I was really interested, but I didn't really know what you could use Bitcoin for, right? And then Ethereum came out, and there was all this talk about smart contracts, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, there's this concept that we kind of haven't had any revolution in since like Hobbes or something like that. You know, like this idea that we might be able to have agreements with each other executed in code was really interesting to me. So that's kind of how I got into this space.
And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen. I started Blockchain by Women with a couple of other women who are very much interested in getting more women into this space. And I also have my own company, BlockchainIntel, which does AML, or anti-money laundering, transaction monitoring, and compliance reporting. So we're helping to find the bad guys. And the reason why I started that company is because when I was at my last blockchain company, those were helping companies get on board in creating new blockchain applications. And one of those companies was slapped with this enormous lawsuit. And the lawsuit was for money laundering, and that included child pornography. So as a mother and a big believer that blockchains are a part of our future, this was the last thing I wanted to be a part of. So I really wanted to help move the industry forward and do my part in helping find the bad guys and also let other people know the good guys in the industry. So what we wanted to do next is really have each of the panelists go through and talk about your blockchain, where you believe that blockchain is in the phase of development, and how long has it been in use, how many users, and just give a snapshot of the applications built on top of it.
Dash was founded in 2014 by a guy named Evan Duffield, who discovered Bitcoin and got really excited about it, but wanted to make some modifications to it to make it explicitly well adapted to payments use cases. So he forked Bitcoin and created what is now known as Dash, and added a couple of modifications that included the addition of a governance system that includes a treasury, which is basically a fund that is used to fund projects that help spread the adoption of Dash. And he also added a layer of master nodes, which are basically just people who own 1,000 Dash and provide services to the network in exchange for a portion of the block reward. So Bitcoin's block reward, 100% of it goes to miners. With Dash, 45% goes to the miners, 45% goes to these master nodes, and then 10% goes into the treasury. In addition, the master nodes have voting rights on how those treasury dollars get spent. So that's how people like me get paid, for better or for worse. So as far as the phase that we're in at the moment, we're very much in a growth phase. We've seen double-digit growth over the past 5 quarters in terms of our median daily transactions. So, in Q3, I think we grew by like 39% in terms of median daily transactions and 178% year over year. We have, at this point, we hover around about 60,000 daily active users, or daily active addresses rather, which is almost double what it was last year around this time. So that's exciting. And as far as where we are in terms of applications, we have about, I think, 23 wallets that I'm aware of that support Dash. about 200 exchanges and brokers that support us. And we're in the process of building a development platform called Dash Platform that will allow developers to build applications and store application data on our network, and use programming languages that they're familiar with, like JavaScript and Objective-C, which is used to build iOS apps, and Java, which is used to build Android apps.
All right, so Tezos was created by Arthur and Kathleen Brightman. It's a layer 1 protocol with smart contracts, and it's proof of stake. So with that network, every single layer 1 has like a particular use case, even though they're a general purpose blockchain, because their main focus is on security and upgradability. So with security, they have formal verification, and their blockchain is basically very safe. So it's built for something that needs to exist for a long time and requires a lot of money. So that's why there's a lot of projects like tokenizing on top of that. In terms of where we are right now, it's been about a year since their launch of mainnet, so they're still pretty early compared to most other projects. And because of that, like the focus right now is on improving developer experience, which means tooling, because the tooling kind of sucks. So it's kind of hard to build on Tezos, to be honest, right now. But there are projects building. It's just a matter of making it easier so more people can actually learn. So Truffle recently decided to also build on Tezos. So over time, like there's going to be a developer suite, and it'll just become easier for more applications to migrate or build. But it's something that'll take time. And that's where we are now.
So yeah, Sia was founded in 2014, and we've been on the mainnet since 2015. So in terms of phase, we are pretty old in the crypto space. But in terms of focus, so the first few years was spent on building the infrastructure, making sure that the base use case, which is data storage, was secure and robust. And now we've reached the next phase where we are production ready. We are seeing developers building a lot of different apps on Sia. We are seeing real world use case usage. So recently our network crossed around 500 terabytes, and we are now at 650 terabytes that are stored on the network. So now our focus is more towards feature parity. Feature parity, not with just crypto companies, but then traditional players like Amazon, Google, and then the features that they provide, bringing that to a decentralized world. In terms of applications, I think there are protocols out there that are working on upgrading the financial infrastructure that exists today. Our focus is a little different, where we are working on upgrading the overall internet infrastructure. And we believe the base layer of the internet is the storage layer, where you can store data, you can transact data, you can move data around. And once you build that layer, you can build different decentralized applications on top of that. So for example, like a decentralized YouTube, decentralized content sharing, decentralized websites. So that's where we are different in terms of our focus and use case.
So at AgoraK, right now we're at the testnet stage. We have a private testnet, and so if you want invites to that, Tatiana here is the person to ask. But I think we're probably the youngest company out of this panel for sure. The stage that we're at, though, in terms of our development, is that first we're building this first edition on the Cosmos SDK. So we're able to leverage Cosmos for their Tendermint implementation, all of that. But what I'm really excited about in terms of tooling is something that I've specifically been working on, which we call Zoe. And what Zoe does is it's a platform that allows developers to write smart contracts in a really easy way. So I think we've all heard of all the things that can go wrong with smart contracts, right? Like you just missed like one little thing and suddenly you lost $1 million, right? So some really terrible experiences both as a developer and as a user of smart contracts in the past. And what Zoe does, what our smart contract platform does, is it enforces offer safety. And so by that, what I mean is, if I'm the user of a smart contract, I can say I want to trade, 2 ETH for 5, Bitcoin or something like that, and I'm guaranteed to either get what I want or get a full refund in return. And so it's kind of a separation of concerns where you escrow the underlying funds with Zoe. And then as a user, you can use the smart contract, but the smart contract never actually has access to the underlying funds, which is really cool because it gives the smart contract developers the freedom to, write whatever option they want, write a Uniswap implementation, whatever it is. But they don't have to worry that just because of a bug, someone may lose all their money. So it's kind of a safety net on both sides.
Is this going to do atomic swaps?
Yeah. So one of I think like the main functions of contract, like just in general as a legal theory, is like the most basic version of that is like, okay, right now we're going to swap, right? But if you give me your thing first, I may run off with both of them, right? So I think like what we're seeing is something really cool, which is like this thing that has traditionally kind of been in the legal space, or like you had to use an escrow agent or what have you, we're able to do with smart contracts. And like it turns out that a lot of the applications that you see on cryptocurrencies have this kind of offer format where you're saying, I want this, but only if I get that. And I don't want to send you this like one-way payment where I don't know if I actually get what I want back. So I think we're going to see some really cool things in the future moving forward.
Great. So you guys could go into the use cases that you're most excited about or that you're seeing prevalent on this blockchain.
So as I mentioned, Dash is primarily focused on day-to-day payments. So most of our use cases center around e-commerce and point-of-sale type of environments. We've seen, based on the data that we have available to us, which is primarily App Store data and just what we know from our proposal system, which is the treasury system I was talking about that funds projects that spread the adoption of Dash. Our strongest adoption has been mainly in Latin America, and particularly in Venezuela, and particularly in Caracas. So most of the folks that are the businesses that accept Dash are small to medium-sized businesses, although we have seen some larger integrations take place, like last year, Church's Chicken began accepting Dash. Other use cases, actually there's one more that I want to mention that is a project that I'm particularly fond of that was funded by our treasury system, which was actually led by an amazing woman, Joanna, who is based in Merida in Venezuela, and she enabled the ability to pay with Dash at a local mall parking garage. So previously, people were having to wait for as long as 30 minutes for a debit card transaction to go through at this parking garage. And now they're able to use Dash and have those transactions settled within 1 or 2 seconds. So other use cases that we've seen are in the gaming space. We've seen some gaming sites integrate Dash and accept it as a payment method. Gaming, as you may know, is an industry that has a lot of problems with chargebacks. So more and more gaming sites are interested in crypto. Dash is also a great option for traders who want to move their money around fast to be able to take advantage of arbitrage opportunities.
So I'm happy to talk about use cases for both Tezos and Stellar. Tezos, in terms of use cases, because of the stage they're at right now and the fact that they're focused on tooling, use cases, they're focused a lot on like tokenizing securities. So they talk to a lot of real estate companies and also anything that can be tokenized. But at the stage they are right now, tooling is like the most important thing. In terms of Stellar, which is another layer one that I work for, their main use case is remittance, which is moving money across borders, which is a real pain point in the industry. So for them, like unlike Ripple, they're starting down market. So they're starting in developing countries, targeting MTOs and like banks and getting them to build on top of Stellar. So that way that like people can move money easily across borders without paying a lot of transaction fees or waiting a very long time. So it's one of those things that will actually have an impact on the world and it's very needed. Versus in developed countries, like blockchain is geeky nerdy awesome, but it's not painful. So like adoption is much harder versus in developing markets, like people will actually jump on it because it's very
Yeah, and with regards to Sia, as of today, where the platform is, the biggest use case is storing your data, backing up your data. And just to point out why that's important is there are a couple of reasons. One, privacy concerns. So when you're storing data at a centralized storage provider, one, they have access to all your information. They do a lot of data mining, and this is public knowledge, so it's not hidden. In Sia, all of your data is encrypted client-side. So even before your data hits the network, it's encrypted. So only the user, the data owner, has access to it and can provide access to anyone else. They have full control over their data. Secondly, what's important is because it's an open marketplace, the number of storage providers on the platform are close to 300 plus. So instead of storing data at one storage provider, you are splitting your data and storing it across 50 storage providers. So you're reducing the risk of server farm just going down. You're reducing the risk of platform deplatforming you. And then what benefits it gives is because there are these multiple storage providers that are competing to get your business, they push down the prices. And that's why on the network, we have currently the price is only $1 per terabyte per month. If you compare to traditional players, Amazon charges anywhere close to $20 to $25 dollars per terabyte per month. So because of this competitive marketplace, the prices also go down. So I think privacy, security, and cost are the biggest benefits, and that's where we are seeing a lot of use cases. So giving one example, DLive is the live streaming platform for SF Blockchain Week. So we're partnering with them. They have a ton of videos, they have a ton of data that needs storing, but they have to throw away a lot of like old archival data because they cannot afford storing it for long term on Amazon. So that's a perfect use case where they're able to use Sia as a cheaper, more secure solution to store data. And like I said, in the future, once this data layer is strong and robust, we can do additional use cases like decentralized YouTube and decentralized Twitter.
So like I said, we have our private testnet. So we're still at kind of like at the stage before we have a lot of users for, actually our blockchain solutions. But on the JavaScript side of things, as I mentioned, Metamask has a version of their stuff that uses our secure JavaScript solution. So I can talk a little bit about that. So Metamask right now is using our stuff for two things. They want to lock down their JavaScript dependencies, right? Because there was actually an attack that was going through the JavaScript dependencies to try to steal Bitcoin private keys. And I'm not sure if it was successful or not, but there was basically nothing stopping it. So the full dependency graph just kind of has to be locked down. So that solution is called Lava Mode, and I think they're hoping to go to production soon. Still kind of in progress. And then the other thing that MetaMask is doing, which is really cool, is a plugin architecture called MetaMask Snaps. And so that allows things like if you, for instance, they have a plugin from Starkware allowing like custom crypto signatures. So basically, as I understand it, it was a huge problem for them, this kind of political struggle of like what new feature they were going to include, right? Because they worked with a whole bunch of different projects. They all wanted their kind of like pet feature. And so it was like, well, what are they going to work on first? How do they prioritize these things? what happens if it's like just not a good feature for everyone else, you know, that sort of a thing. But with the plugin architecture, it allows them to say, well, if you want it, you know, build it, and you can do it. And the reason why it's safe is because all of that code that someone may want to write as a plugin executes in its own safe environment. So that's part of like our JavaScript security model. So I think we're seeing a lot of adoption there, and hopefully it'll transfer to our blockchain once we actually have that on mainnet.
So building on top of that, you know, what specific tools do you think are needed, particularly to help the developers that are the ones building these new applications? And you started to talk a little about that, but just if you could elaborate, you know, what specific areas.
Yeah, so like in terms of tooling, like it can start with something very simple in terms of like good documentation. Most blockchains don't really have that in good tutorials. And beyond that, it's just like having products that have good user experiences so people can actually use it. And honestly, it's just like very basic things, and it's getting people to not spin off and do their own things. So just like keeping everyone aligned on what is important so that they can move the ecosystem forward. It's just access to information and trusted information.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the documentation statement. It's not really great in the blockchain space. So what's unique is because a lot of these are protocols and infrastructure projects, they're not necessarily for the end user. So what you're enabling is developers to build those end user solutions, right? So you're focused on building the developer community. And that's why it's important to have dev tools. So what we do is that we have extensive API documentations that the developers can interact with. We have client libraries in Go and JavaScript, as written in Go, so that makes sense. But other than that, I think what's exciting in the crypto and blockchain space is the whole community, because there's a lot of time we have a whole Discord channel where there are so many questions that come in that we don't have the bandwidth to answer, but because there's a whole vibrant ecosystem community, a lot of time everyone's helping each other out. So I think that's unique to the space.
Yeah, just to briefly add to that, I kind of see the whole software engineering as a whole has kind of moved forward in terms of safety. So like, you know, memory safety, things like that. It used to be, and it is still in some languages, like if you're programming, really bad things can happen if you're not careful, right? Like, you know, you might be editing someone else's data. You might like have concurrency issues, you know, so there's all of these safety properties that have been developed over time so that, you know, as things have improved, things get a little bit safer. You don't have to worry about like a whole host of issues. So like the offer safety principle that I mentioned earlier, I think is one of those things that will really help developers so that they kind of have the safety net where they can focus on the particular logic of their smart contract as they're building it, and they can do so in JavaScript, which is a very familiar language to them, or to many developers at least. And I think like having those safety nets that we're kind of seeing blossoming in the industry will really help people so that, you know, at worst case scenario, like hopefully really bad things don't happen. So I think those safety nets are really important.
Okay, so we're gonna shift gears and talk about some more controversial features like privacy. Now I know as a lot of companies like Facebook try to get into this space, privacy is something they're gonna have to, or they have been trying to deal with. Now, with the blockchains that you're focused on, how have you addressed privacy, and how has that sort of changed or morphed over time as new regulations have come into play and we've had to deal with sort of the mass adoption sort of conundrum?
So I feel like privacy features get kind of a bad rap, and sometimes unfairly so. There's kind of this meme that I've noticed appears to be floating around the world of crypto at the moment, which I really like, which is that privacy is a spectrum. And we wrote about it in a brochure that we shared with some of our partners, and then I was reading, I don't know if anybody read, there's a blog post that's great on the Multicoin Capital blog about privacy, and it talks about this spectrum, right? And it's, you know, everything from the most, you know, all of your data is out there for the world to see, to the super private, you know, completely concealed transactions. With Dash, we offer optional privacy called Private Send, which is basically just a mixing service, just like any other mixing service that's out there, like CoinJoin, for example, that a lot of people use with Bitcoin. As a result of that, as well as sort of an early branding misstep, where for a brief moment in time we were known as Dark Coin, unfortunately, which has all sorts of not awesome implications, right? Fortunately, they rebranded to Dash, which stands for Digital Cash. But as a result of those things, we sort of got thrown into the category of privacy coins, which is really, it's not the case. But we do offer this optional private send feature for people who want to have some level of financial privacy. And, you know, I think the thing that a lot of people forget is that blockchains are more public than your bank account. And for us, at least, who are trying to offer people an actual payment method, we need to offer some level of privacy for those who want it, because not everybody wants the world to know how much they're charging for services at their business. They don't want their coworkers to know necessarily how much money they're making. And, you know, and beyond that, there are some parts of the world where protecting your financial privacy can be a matter of life and death. And so I think when it comes to privacy features, and at least, you know, with the optional privacy that we offer, the benefits of offering that type of feature outweigh the risks.
And just in terms of transaction volume, right, Dash has less than 2% of its users even using Private Send. And you look at another coin like Zcash, and it's less than 10%. So Zcash came out and was all about privacy, but in the end, still less than 10% use it. So most people, like you're saying, have their transactions, you know, not anonymous, but out there.
Yeah, but I think it's important to have the option, right? And people can choose not to opt in, like you said. But there was an interesting billboard that I saw coming from the airport that said, "Privacy is a right, let's treat it that way." So when we talk about privacy, the first, you know, unfortunately, the first thing that comes to mind is, yeah, that person wants privacy because they want to do something wrong, which is the wrong way to look at it, right? Privacy is not something that's always negative. So recently, Chain Analysis, which is another crypto blockchain analysis company, came out with their research, which said using the mixers, less than 3% of them were used for illicit activities. So there is more than 90% use case, which is not illicit, which is real world usage. So, you know, looking at privacy in that frame, I think is, you know, needs to change as a society. We need to evolve. In terms of Sia specifically, that's one of our fundamental core value propositions. So privacy is by default. It's not something that you can choose or not choose. It's by default. But if you don't want to use it, sure, that's your take. And I think we don't realize how important data is. Data has overtaken oil in terms of value, the global data marketplace, and a lot of, you know, monopolies are now monetizing on your data, which can be given back. The control can be given back to individuals and data owners.
Let's talk about another controversial topic, and that is scalability. Everyone always knocks the blockchain for not being scalable. It's, you know, you look at Bitcoin, nobody could use it really. Oh, not everyone can use it because it just isn't going to scale for everyone. So you could talk about your experience at how your blockchain addresses those scalable issues and really knocks down those bad ideas.
So I will tell you guys that I flew in from Florida this morning and I sat next to this guy on the plane who started asking me questions about what I did. Big mistake. And as we were walking out of the terminal, I started talking about scalability. And he was like, I have to go into this bookstore. And I was like, okay. Sorry. So I'll try not to bore you with mine, but I get excited about scalability. So Dash right now, we have 2 megabyte blocks, which we implemented in 2016. And we have not reached the point where we're looking to increase that block size at the moment. Our median daily transaction numbers are at the moment around 15,500 transactions per day. We are seeing pretty consistently that most of the transactions on our network are instant and the fees are pretty low. We also have compact blocks by default on the Dash blockchain. Compact blocks basically just reduces the amount of information that you have to send around the network, so it speeds things up a little bit. And ASU, Arizona State University, did some research on our scalability potential last year and determined that with compact blocks, we could get to about 6 to 8 megabyte block sizes without any real problems. That was before actually we introduced a new feature called chain locks, which should allow us to go, we believe, up to about 16 megabyte block sizes. And then there are a couple new interesting block propagation technologies being worked on at the moment. One is velocity protocol, which is being worked on at ASU. There's another one, graphene, which some people may have heard of being worked on at UMass. And we believe that the combination of the compact blocks plus chain locks plus these other protocols could allow us to easily scale to block sizes of several hundred megabytes, which in terms of transaction volumes would far exceed what PayPal is doing today.
So scalability is really important to us at AgoraK. So we're actually partnering with Cosmos right now to build their IBC or inter-blockchain communication protocol. And what that will allow is, instead of it being kind of this model where you need to do all of your computation on one blockchain and one blockchain will really rule them all, right? There's this other model where, if you want to have a certain application, you can do it on a different blockchain and you can have inter-blockchain communication so that a token on this chain can be used on this other chain and vice versa. And so we're really excited about that. And that kind of goes back to a concept that some of our founders had way back in the day before I was even aware of any of these things. Or probably even born at all. Mark Miller, who's our chief scientist, back in the day was talking with Nick Szabo and Ian Grigg about how you would actually implement smart contracts. And Mark's idea was like, well, you have a trusted third party, there's a computer that you trust to run this code, and the other person or the other entity trusts it as well, and there you run your smart contract and you're good, right? But Nick Szabo, his whole thing, of course, right, was trusted third parties are security holes. So there's kind of been this this idea going back of being able to run code in different places and achieve scalability that way. But as we all know, the blockchain ecosystem has provided us with a new kind of integrity so that you don't have to necessarily trust, have a trusted third-party computer. You can have a different blockchain to do that, and that's how you achieve scalability.
Good. So
In terms of scalability, I think it's really important as a research topic, but I think as an industry, there's like things we should focus on first before that. Because scalability is really important, but it's like not preventing people from adopting blockchain. It's not like people are not using Ethereum because it's not fast enough. The problem is like all these layer ones that are coming out, and even ones that exist right now. The problem is just there isn't very good product market fit. So the ones with smart contracts built on top of them, like those businesses don't really have end users. So there's not a lot of transaction volume. And then it's like there's very little use for most layer ones. So it's like when projects focus on scalability, it's like, it's great because that will be important if they survive long. So they have to like figure out product market fit before that even becomes a problem ultimately. But that's my opinion.
So in Sia, technically, you could store a petabyte of data in one transaction. So in terms of scalability, it's not an issue when you're talking about data storage because all of that happens peer-to-peer. It's not on the blockchain. None of the data is stored on the blockchain. Where the limitations are is, of course, in how many transactions you can do on-chain. So something that we use is called payment channels, which is, if you're familiar with Lightning Network, that's what they use for doing payments. So we use payment channels where most of the transactions happen off-chain and then they're settled on-chain in one transaction. So to give you an example, right now we have around 1 million transactions happening every day off-chain, and then very few of those go on-chain and they are settled eventually. So that's one way to scale the blockchain. I think the other important thing that we focused on is keeping the protocol super light. So, all the encryption, redundancy, all of that happens client side. None of that is forced onto the blockchain. So keeping the protocol light and client heavy is what we've used as a strategy for scalability. And then of course there are, future technologies that are coming in like Q3XO and such, which would reduce the size of the entire blockchain. So currently the Sia blockchain is only 16 gigabytes and we hope to reduce it further.
So let's delve into that question about product market fit and if things like smart contracts really are helping with that or not. So if you could share your perspective on that in terms of what is a smart contract. And I know in Dash, we've talked in the past about how you don't really need smart contracts. I mean, there's a lot of other application features and things that Dash offers that basically do the same thing that other smart contracts do without the, sort of heavy footprint and issues around coding and testing. So if you guys could just offer your opinions on this perspective.
Well, like in terms of blockchains, like not everyone needs a smart contract platform because like every blockchain should have a specific use case, and those that don't have it just haven't figured out how to work. So like recently, like there's been so many layer ones that have come out because VCs have been investing in that very heavily because their idea is like if a layer one launches well, like they will get rich. Therefore, that's why all this money is going into layer ones. So VCs were talking about scalability wars a while ago, and it's very ironic, which is why I hate the term when people talk about scalability because it's not really a problem at the moment. It's just something that people pitch about when they are trying to raise money, about how every project has a lot of TPS, and it's just really funny to me. But in terms of product market fit, it's just all these layer ones are not doing end user research because when you think about it, people in developed countries don't really need blockchain technology. Like they can use a database, like they can use traditional tech, like the financial industry isn't broken. But if you go to like somewhere like Latin America, somewhere like Southeast Asia, they actually do need the technology, and people will actually use it. So people understand that, but they don't really understand the sort of businesses that are emerging from those markets because they aren't actually doing research. So there's like this divide between what is geeky, nerdy, awesome in San Francisco and what is actually needed, and people are not really doing that research, which is why people are not building things that we need. So it's something that will happen over time. It's like during the Blockstack conference, like someone talked about like the history of the internet and how like it started with experimentation and then fragmentation and then yes, and then the user experience and then interoperability and consolidation. So right now, like we're at the stage where it's like experimentation and fragmentation. We're starting fragmentation, I guess, because all these layer ones are launching. But it's still very early because like the space is like a decade, pretty much. So it's interesting, it's exciting, and because everything is open source, like as long as like it's good actors moving forward, like it's learning experiences for the industry, and it's exciting to see how fast like academic research gets implemented in the real world, which is cool. But it's just them, these like scientists, experimenters actually doing end user research, which is like the gap right now, I think. So that's
Yeah, so I kind of tend to see things from like an econ or like a legal perspective. And so like if you look at even something as, you know, now it looks almost quote unquote simple as like Bitcoin, I mean, compared to other blockchains, even something like Bitcoin is actually enforcing property rights. And because what it's doing is saying, is this a valid transfer of ownership or is it not? And so, so looking at it from that perspective, you know, if you're kind of, there's this great paper by A.M. Honore that kind of came out in the 60s that really became essential about the bundle of rights that are part of ownership. And something like Bitcoin is doing, or cryptocurrencies in general are doing a few of those things in that bundle, right? So it's like giving you the right to transfer it, giving you the right to hold it. There are a few other things, but that's like basically it. But I think what smart contracts give us is the expression of many more types of rights. So for instance, like in on our testnet, we have kind of a proof of concept using something similar to like the $1 million homepage, or like if you've seen like Reddit's Our Place experiment. But basically you can buy and sell pixels, which, okay, you know, that's basically a kind of like a tokenized, you know, pixel market, right? But the really cool thing is that we have additional rights that you can better express in the system. So you can actually, if you have ownership of the pixel, you can color it, but you can also kind of alienate that use right. You can sell the right to color it to someone else and still maintain ownership of the pixel. And so that's kind of like the owner-tenant, subtenant relationship that we see all the time in real life. And so on our system, we're able to do that. And so what we're really excited about for smart contracts is kind of like breaking out of this tokenization scheme where everything is just kind of a cryptocurrency, and maybe you can try to match some of these real life legal concepts to these tokens, and actually trying to express those on our system, both with more complex property rights and kind of this offer structure where you can actually say, let's enforce this deal, and you know, if I don't actually get what I want a full refund back. So that's what we're trying to do at AgoraK.
I'll just quickly add that on Sia, we don't need smart contracts because the protocol has one type of smart contract called file contracts, which is basically what facilitates the storage between the renters and the host. In terms of developers, they don't need to interact with those smart contracts. They can build apps similar to any other app building experience that if you're building an app on iOS or Android. So yeah, I think it depends on from a use case perspective. And in our protocol, we just internalize that on the base layer.
Well, thank you guys for that wonderful discussion. Wanted to open up. Do you in the audience have any questions? And so please let me know. And okay.
I probably don't need it.
Okay.
Yeah. So without pitching to the companies you're working for, let's say I'm just a random app developer and I want to build secure, fun things and be all decentralized and open source. Where would I go? Where do I start?
It's also, what do you want to get out?
Yeah.
Why are you
just build like, I don't know, apps for gaming.
Are you trying to make money, or is this for fun? There's a difference.
Fun and money.
Are you trying to build a business, or is this like a fun side hustle project?
Start with a fun project, but with aspiration for building. But I want to enter into blockchain. But let's say I'm some JavaScript developer, and I kind of like wanna play with blockchain world, but I'm not that familiar. I have no time to learn forever all the blockchain stuff, and I kind of like wanna put my trust, but I don't know who to trust. So where would I go?
I would honestly recommend starting on Ethereum because it is the best documentation. So like if you aren't familiar with blockchain and you're just a developer that wants to get into the space, Ethereum is the easiest place to go.
And that's
Yeah.
because Ethereum has best documentation on how to do it.
Yeah, like Stellar is pretty good from what I heard, but it's like it's mostly for like financial applications. So you would need that background as well. But if you're just building geeky fun things, Ethereum would be a good choice.
And for serious developers from enterprises,
I think it's really hard to say right now because we're seeing so much kind of churn in the industry. Like if you're building something for enterprise, right, you want it to be long-term sustainable. And so it's really hard to say like, yes, this is what you should be building on if that blockchain isn't around next year, right? So I think it's really hard. So I guess I would stick with what really inspires the developers because what they're building, they may have to change. You know, I think we're seeing. I think I heard like for Aragon, for instance, on Ethereum, like many of their smart contracts are going to break with the recent updates that are going to happen. So even huge players in the space are kind of having this problem. So for the people who are independent, who are just getting started, I think it's a huge problem. So I would recommend that they focus on just learning and doing what inspires them, seeing what's cool in the space, and kind of using it as an experimental ground currently. And hopefully the ecosystem will firm up, and we'll actually see long-term use cases that can be used for enterprise and other uses.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, even if you're building on, you pick a certain blockchain and you're building on it and things break, I think a lot of your code and your experience and your learnings will still be portable to another blockchain. Think of it as a tech stack, right? If your base infrastructure changes, you have to definitely change the code to interact with it, but you can still take that out, replace it with something else. So I think it's still valuable, the lessons that you learn, the concepts that you learn, and then you can port over it.
Yeah, and it's also, yes. So adding to what you mentioned, it's also very important as like a developer to understand like the different nuances of the blockchain space. Because what I've seen like with a lot of projects that end up failing, and this is just from like developers and like marketers and sales that transition from like the traditional like text-based to blockchain, is just they don't take the time to like get into the blockchain community and just like understand what it means to be in the space and like the different cultural aspects to the space. And if they don't understand that, they're going to make bad decisions in the future. So it's good just to start with a project where you like the community, because those will be the people you're interacting with very happily, and the people that you'll be learning from. So like, yeah, just whichever one you think is the best.
Yeah, but if you're completely new to the space, that's what I did, and I would recommend everyone is to just understand how Bitcoin works. All of this started with Bitcoin, and if you understand how Bitcoin works, the technology behind it, the concepts, I think you can understand other protocols that are changing or adding functionality. So if you had to start and you don't know, where to go, I would start with the Bitcoin project.
And LockNet is really good.
What was that?
LockNet, so LOPP.net. And that was created by like a former Bitcoin core.
With all the Bitcoin resources.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Zoe. I have a question to the Sia. So what is your USP besides the price you mentioned to current or existing cloud storages like AWS or like centralized cloud storages?
Sorry, what was the question?
The USP,
the
unique selling point. Like why should I use you instead of AWS like a centralized storage?
Right. So I mean, the biggest reason is cost.
Besides the price you mentioned.
Oh, besides the price. Okay. The second, I think, biggest reason is privacy. and being able to control your data. So right now, when you put data on these centralized services, one, not only they're able to see that data, two, they are actually mining your data and monetizing on it, right? The third problem is that you are so heavily dependent on these services, your business is totally dependent on them. If they decide to deplatform you because for some reason your business doesn't align with their business model, then you are completely at a loss. So we've seen that in the last 2 years, where if Amazon goes down, half of the internet goes down, right? And right now it's just causing economic losses for a few hours, where websites are going down, businesses are going down. But imagine in a world where we are living with IoT devices, which are crucial, right, in your cars or in your hospitals, and then the reliance on the single point of failure becomes even more drastic. So yeah, privacy, security, reliance on a single centralized point of failure.
I have a follow-up question to the earlier question about what we should develop on. So I know that if I want to start developing smart contracts, I can download Metamask, go find a Solidity tutorial on using mastering Ethereum or whatever. If I wanted to build something that regular people that haven't got Metamask installed are going to use, what can I do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I wish I could say just download all of our stuff, but we're still kind of at in the early stages, so hopefully that'll be true in the next 6 months or so. But I think we're figuring out how some of these things are going to work, and that kind of the last mile. People always say okay, we haven't been focusing on the user experience, right? Or we haven't been focusing on actually getting it out there to the users. But I think there's still huge problems that we're grappling with. So like I mentioned in the smart contract space, just being able to build a smart contract that won't fail on you catastrophically, that's really, really hard to do right now. So I think hopefully some of these solutions we're working on in parallel, they will start coming together, and AgoraK will hopefully be one of those things that will allow you to, as a smart contract developer, just download this SDK, start building and interacting with users.
I think it also depends on what you mean by regular people. So, I mean, not a lot of regular people are really using crypto right now, right? We're still in the early adopter phase. But there are, if you mean actual user-facing applications, there's lots of, the open source ethos is everywhere in this space, and that includes user-facing applications. So there's lots of open source user-facing applications that you can contribute to if you wanted to. The ones that come to mind, obviously, now I'm going to try to peddle our Dash wallets, but I mean, another one that comes to mind is Status, which is an Ethereum-based application, which I always thought was pretty interesting. So.
Say something. I'm just about because it seems people are talking a lot about what dApps are out there that people are actually using right now. And in the Ethereum space, it's on any blockchain network as well, but the whole decentralized finance space is really starting to blossom. Like in 2019, the entire year, it's really taken off. So there are a number of advancements that have been made where it makes it very easy for users to onboard users, basically, and they don't know it's a blockchain on the back end. And so rather than users making 0.5% at their bank, they're able to make 5, 6, 7%. So there's a lot happening in the DeFi space, and it's mainly on Ethereum, but there are other blockchains out there that are trying to add DeFi apps.
Any other? Oh,
sure. I don't know if I have a good question. I was really enjoying your. I'm sad your questions are over because I was enjoying listening. I'm new to crypto. I've been in crypto for about 1.5 years, and I'm a product guy. I've been a product manager for a long time. And I see you guys are either that's your title, or I can hear it in your thinking. It's the strategy and the user research. So being in crypto, what do we do? How do you guys as product leaders get your head out of the world that we're in, where in San Francisco, it's all super hip to talk about technology and how rad either scaling is going to be or some other thing, to where we get to thinking about what the business is going to be that we're building towards. And I imagine that can be really challenging in a time when we're trying to invent stuff that hasn't been done before and we don't necessarily know. So I'd just love to hear challenges or how you're thinking about that or overcoming that, or do you find that a challenge?
So I just want to make a brief note. I'm not the product person, but what inspires me most is there have been presentations on research in Venezuela, or recently there was a presentation at DevCon about what it's like to live in Argentina and be fully dependent on the crypto income. And to me, those things are that's just super, super fascinating, and kind of gets you out of the bubble of San Francisco.
I think one of the challenges is definitely how do you create a product which is truly decentralized? Because some features, there's definitely a need for having centralized infrastructure, because users are not going to go through 100 steps to use your product, right? So that's where that distinction and the challenge comes in, where on one hand we are so focused on decentralization, but that also creates a lot of friction from a user's perspective. One kind of semi-solution that I've seen in the space is keeping the protocol level, like layer 1, completely decentralized, and then these apps that are built on top of them are making it easier for users by adding some crutches here and there. I think the other challenge is monetizing. How do you monetize an open source platform? Right? Sia, you don't have to interact with us. You don't have to ask us to use Sia. It's out there, the code is there, you download it and you can start using it without even reaching out to us. So how do you monetize it? And then how do you track your users? Because you don't. So how do you, terms like what's your growth, what your user profile looks like. So these are very new challenges, but also they have their own benefits. And I think the industry overall hasn't matured to a phase where we have these metrics that we can use to evaluate a certain protocol, but I think we'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to jump into this because I'm running a meetup around this next week, actually.
All right.
So during DevCon, Consensus actually they did a session on decentralization. So they actually created a methodology for measuring decentralization. Because the funny thing is, every single layer 1 claims that they're decentralized, but decentralization is one of those things that covers a lot of different categories, and it's hard to say we're decentralized. We are decentralized in this way, not in these other categories. So, yeah, I honestly don't think any layer 1 is truly decentralized. There's more decentralized than others.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
when we say decentralized, what we mean is that you don't have to rely on anything. You don't have to rely on the hosts that are storing, the storage providers that are storing on the network, because that's designed in the protocol that you will have proofs that your data is stored. You don't have to rely on us to get the code, because it's out there. You don't have to rely on payment processors, because we use cryptocurrency for payments, right? So when we say decentralized, we mean that the user has total control over their data and over their use case, and they don't have to rely on anyone else.
I think as far as how we execute typical product management in this space, user feedback was mentioned, and I just to pile on to that, I think it's so critical, and certainly one of the greatest challenges in this space is the fact that part of our sort of ethos is that we don't collect much data about our users. Nonetheless, one of the great things about this space is that most projects have very active, very vocal communities who are
giving
Just
feedback,
happy
even if you don't ask.
to talk to you. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, leverage that because, you know, this you know, it may be a small community now, but each of those people have their own network and they have feedback to give on, okay, you know, does this value proposition appeal to somebody who doesn't appreciate decentralization for decentralization's sake? So, you know, one of the things that I started doing in the absence of actual real, I mean, really robust user data anyway, certainly not to the level that I've had in past roles, was just start reaching out to people and just say, hey, can I have a conversation? And, you know, I mean, I don't think I've ever gotten turned down.
Yeah, I think that comes back to the point of opt-in, opt-out, right? In traditional models, you're tracking your user by default, not giving them an option to have that privacy. Versus in this model, you're reaching out to users, and if they want to share their feedback, if they want to share how they're using your platform, it's up to them. So again, it comes back to having that option of sharing or not sharing.
I'll say,
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. So in terms of products, I think a good way to think about it to start would be personas and then geographies. So personas for this space, like for layer ones, the first one would be retail investors, and then it'd be developers, and developers can be like entrepreneurs as well. And then there are businesses, and businesses can be blockchain businesses or traditional businesses are migrating onto blockchain. And for retail investors, it can also segment to just like traders, or it can be end users for these businesses. So like that's a good way to think about personas.
Okay.
And then for those personas, it's figuring out how they sit in different countries because you want to get adoption for it. So it's like doing end user research in that way for specific products that you're selling or particular use cases. And I guess that's a good way to think about it when you're studying.
Yeah.
so I'll say for
Thanks
those
that.
who have opted in, we have data, some data on what people are doing. So for example, you know, if you look at a blockchain and where the transactions are, so whether it's Bitcoin or Dash, for those who have that information there, you can see, well, is it actually happening? Are the transactions clustering or happening in the US versus Venezuela or some other country, right? So there is data out there. It's not perfect, but there is that level of geographic data based on the transactions. Now you can go a level deeper and say, well, because you know some of the entities, now we're not looking at individuals here, so nothing about Liz specifically in what she's doing. But we could say, all right, we know this exchange, ZB.com, who claims to be doing the most Dash transactions in this time period, is actually probably not, because we can look at a time period, compare their incoming Dash transactions with another exchange's incoming Dash transactions, and see that there are major gaps during the day for ZB.com compared to these other exchanges. And then we can also see for these other exchanges, which one has the highest spikes in activity, and what's going on there, why is that happening, versus others that have maybe more consistent activity. So at an aggregate level, which may be very scary and maybe not so great for certain people, but certainly at an aggregate level for certain entities, that information is out there and you can get to it and use it for, you know, your understanding in terms of, you know, who's basically fake news versus saying the real thing.
And I did not want to undersell the value of data that organizations like BlockchainIntel provide. It is very robust. I think what the frame of reference I was coming from was, you know, I've worked at companies where arguably we know too much about users. So.
Yes, absolutely. That is the problem. So if there are no other questions, we'd like to just wrap up so you guys have some more time to connect. Really quickly, I want to just highlight Dash as one of our other sponsors. So they through their efforts have made it possible tonight. And I don't know, Liz, if you wanted to say anything more about Dash, about your new release, or anything just to advertise.
Freely. Well, I mean, now that you asked. Well, I will talk very briefly just to give you guys a heads up on what we're working on right now, which I did touch on earlier, which is the it's a group of features that we've called evolution. The first major component of it is a development platform that will allow developers interested to build applications on the Dash network and store your application data on our network, which I mentioned before. In addition to that, we are building the first application that will be that will sit on Dash platform, which is called Dash Pay. And one of the super cool features of the platform is that you'll actually be able to exchange payments via usernames instead of long, confusing cryptographic addresses. So Dash Pay will be a very sort of Venmo-like experience where you'll be able to exchange payments with your friends by using just a basic human-readable username. So that's what's coming up for Dash, and thank you so much for having us here. We're glad to be sponsors. So.
Thank you. And thank you all really for having a very thoughtful presence tonight. All of you had great things to contribute. So really, really appreciate that and love that about every session that we do. So we'd love to have you come back. If you're not based here, please join us on the live stream later on, but also keep up with us through all our social and social channels here. So the last thing is my co-founders would have loved to be here, but one is terribly sick and didn't want to get the rest of you sick. Her name is Marina. The other one, Marzanne, like me, had a blackout this past weekend, but her blackout lasted a lot longer, so she's had to kind of deal with that. But otherwise, they'd be here tonight. And as usual, reach out to any of us if you have ideas about speakers, topics, things you want to discuss, or other ideas. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you.